Welcome to Scaling Your Healthy Food Product podcast, where we believe the process of scaling better for you product doesn't have to be lonely, hard, or complicated, but following simple steps to prepare your product to scale correctly will set you up to succeed. If that is you, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Jacinta Kimboy. Let's get started, everybody. If you're like an avid consumer of a certain product, if something goes wrong or if something is different, you're going to notice because you interact with this product so often that you know how the product tastes like, you know how it feels in your mouth. And for you to prevent that, this is where. So welcome. This week we're talking about the second step. We're in the ETS Method series, and this is step 2. So it's the test and improve part of it. So this is where you test and improve your product to strengthen your brand. It is one of those places where you get a chance to be able to strengthen your product before scaling. We'll talk about it in the end, where we talk about the continuous improvement. But for now, we're talking about the testing and improving your product. So this is where you would go to you do like plant trials. You've been doing small ones in the lab trialing, but now you're going to production. So let's say you used to have your production at like your batches are like 50 kilos, and now you're moving to the large batches would be anywhere from 100, 200, 1000, and even more. But in that, this is where if there's any problem, it could be magnified because now you're making so many. So it's important to do the trial, the testing, and the improving before you go large scale, because if you go large scale and you find that there's mistake and your product is not consistent, your product is not exactly the same as what your consumer is used to, this is where you get to a point where you have to decide, are you going to destroy the product, or are you going to send it to your retailers? But then if you do the sending of the retailers, there's a chance that you could lose your customers because they don't find that the product is the same as what they are used to. And this is where you could lose market share compared to what you're used to. So in some cases, this is where you bite the bullet and say, okay, I'm gonna destroy some of them, or depending on how where you are in your business, there are instances where the scaling of the product has really done a number on the brand, because this is where the consumer will notice the difference. Especially, sometimes you might think that the consumer will not notice the difference, but if you're like an avid consumer of a certain product, if something goes wrong or if something is different, you're going to notice because you interact with this product so often that you know how the product tastes like, you know how it feels in your mouth. And for you to prevent that, this is where testing and improving is your way to go, because you might look at it at its time that you're wasting, but really in the grand scheme of things, you're not wasting time. You're saving time and you're using your time effectively, because if you do this testing and improving, you get to save yourself a lot of challenges that could come as you produce your product, especially since you're scaling. You're moving from lower quantities of production to higher quantities of production. Your margin of error is very slim in this case, because now you're dealing with so many 10x or 12x quantities of raw materials than you used to deal with. So this is where the things that you want to focus on when you're testing your ingredient swapping. This is an opportunity for you to save on cost, or an opportunity for you to improve your product. I had an instance. There was a project I was working on, and it was a cookie, and we were using coconut oil. But so we're helping it to scale. And before, they never used to have this issue, but because they were doing it in a smaller manufacturing facility, so their rollers were not as fast as the rollers that we had. And we're having an issue where now the coconut was like leaching out of the dough. And the reason why this was happening was the rollers are so fast and the friction was melting the coconut oil. If you take coconut oil and you rub it between your fingers, it will start to melt. So that's exactly what was happening, and it was leaching out of the dough. And that process was now the product was coming out not as soft as it used to, just because of that piece. So we had to adjust the process to be able to meet that. But there's also the chance where you could also swap the ingredient in this case, if that doesn't affect your packaging. If you have like less packaging and there's an opportunity for you to change your packaging without affecting your inventory, then this is a point where you could go there. And the other thing is like the plant trials, they tend to help you figure out. You do have a recipe, so you have steps, your standard operating procedures where you follow as you're producing your product. But if you go to a larger facility, or let's say you're self-manufacturing and you're now purchasing higher equipments that can be able to manage the quantities that you want to produce, just to be able to meet your market demand, you can find that some of the processes that you used to do in small scale, you don't really need to do, and you need to be able to adjust. You need to be able to adjust based on now the new facility that you're in. The recipe always changes based on especially the equipments, because some of the equipments in a smaller facility, they're not as fast, like the speeds are lower, the rpms are lower compared to when you go to larger facilities. Their rpms could be higher. The mixers, and these are the mixers like for your dough and stuff, you could find that if you are in your facility, and especially if it's like a gluten-free product, you could tend to need to do like some setting, like where the gluten can get formed if you're in a smaller facility. But when you're in a larger facility, just the mixing itself can speed up that process. So you can tend to realize that some of those things can be shrunk. It also saves you time, but if you don't get to do the trials, you won't be able to figure that to be able to figure that out. So that's where the testing is important, for you to be able to see how really different is this manufacturing facility, the capability, the equipment, how do they function. Even the ovens, like depending on which oven you're using, could be different. If it's a tunnel oven, they're different compared to the regular oven. Some of the ones that you would open and close, like those ones, they act differently. If you are baking it in a certain temperature, you need to be able to adjust it just because of how the different equipments function. So that's why it's important to be able to do that. Don't overlook that step, because by you taking the time to do that, it will save you a lot of challenges that could come as a result of you skipping this stage. The other one is the packaging trials. When you test and you improve, especially with the packaging, you could figure out exactly if you need to adjust your packaging. I did a project where we had this was a consumer that was actually brought this on and said it's too much packaging, because you want to be sustainable and you want to be good for the environment. And there was so much, I don't know if you've had that experience even as a consumer, where you'd go to a store and you buy a product, and when you open, you're like, okay, what's in here? Like, you really have to reach your arm under to be able, like, way down in the container to be able, or the box, to be able to get the product. There's so much space left. But if you do the testing, then you could figure out like how much you really need for your packaging, and this is where you get to save in terms of the costing for your packaging. But if you don't do the trials, you won't figure that out. So in this specific project, we're able to reduce the packaging by a third of the material. So that one also saved us some cost in terms of the packaging and the overall costing of the product, just by reducing the packaging material. So this is where you can really figure out what works. And the other thing too that I've noticed is, especially when you go higher, when you increase your production, it could also be the cooling piece of it. Because when you're like in a smaller facility, most of the things are usually manual. There's not so many equipments that can make this automated. But if you go to higher facilities, larger facilities, automation is the thing. They've mastered the way they do their production efficiency, and you will see that a lot of the things are automated that way. And by that, it could be like your product had time to, especially if, let's say, your packaging material was, you're producing so much in such a short time, and then your packaging can only package let's say 50 a minute. So that becomes like the bottleneck. But if you go to higher, they're able to have packaging equipments that can almost match what the oven is baking and all the products are being produced. And it could be in such a way that maybe in your facility you are able to cool your product, depending. It could have been that you are using for like 4 hours or maybe a day. You're able to cool your product to the temperature that you want. But now that you go to a higher and a larger facility, you figure out that it's very automated. And if your product is not cool to the standards that you want, then you can have smudging. If you have a chocolate chip, you could have smudging in the packaging, and it doesn't really look good by the time the consumer receives your product. So this is where you get to do a lot of those trials and really look at the product holistically in terms of packaging. But the good thing is you can tend to do so many of those evaluation during the testing phase and improving. So you could go in steps and do your ingredients, then you're now looking at the process and your packaging. But then also the process improvement is a lot of the times when you're moving from like a small one to a larger one, you could figure out that some of the processing, some of the steps that you are using before, you are going through before, you don't really need them. And you could now cut them and reduce them just based on the equipments that you have where you are. And even if it's like you're self manufacturing, if you've bought higher equipments, this is where you could also reduce and be able to really tone down and improve your recipe based on the process. But if you don't do the testing, then you won't be able to know what you need to do. Or you could also waste money in the sense that you will run this first production thinking that everything will remain the same, but now larger, and you realize that, oh, you don't need that mixing or you don't need this process because your product is coming out different than you are used to. Let's say you used to have it's an oatmeal cookie, and you could be able to see the oat flake at the end of the production in your product. You could literally see like the oat flake, but now you don't see the oat flake. It's all been mixed, and it's been chopped into small pieces. This is where you could troubleshoot and say, okay, we need to reduce the time of the mixing, because the RPMs are much faster at higher speeds. The blender is breaking the oat flake. So by you going through this testing, you're able to improve, you're able to save money, you're able to improve a lot of the things that you would necessarily not be able to. So this is a great opportunity for you to strengthen your product before you scale. And this is why we do test and improve. This is a great opportunity for any food founder or any brand to improve their product. And the other piece that comes after this is like continuous improvement in terms of testing and improving. The continuous improvement of your process of your product, you also can continue to do that as you produce. If let's say you're producing your product at a co-manufacturing facility, this is where you could have an agreement that you could go there anytime for you to be able to just look at the process and see what you can improve and how your product is looking. Always be the food founder that goes or visits the facility often, so you can tend to see what's happening. Because sometimes they might even have, depending on the kind of relationship you have, they might purchase an equipment that's more of an improvement of the line. But if you're not there to see what's happening, the other piece could be they have their R&D and can take care of that. But in some cases, the way the people think, especially if it's not the founder, because you really know your product in and out, but another person, you have to be able to translate that to the other person for them to do exactly what you need. So you need to be there. You need to see how it's improving and how your product is functioning, and how your product is coming out, because at the end of the day, you want your consumer to enjoy a similar product that they're used to, that they've grown to love. So you don't want them to start testing and guessing your product because something is a little bit off. And this is the part where like any customer complaints come into play. Like always look into that and see what's happening, because this can tell you a lot more than you think, because sometimes it's not even something that was expected, because you could have like your qualities of the raw materials that you're expecting from a supplier, But let's say that year there was a drought and something was just off. So this is where, if you know, you could if you have those complaints and then you're able to go back and look into it, you can figure out a way and you can have a better answer for your consumer. So that's why this step is also important for you to know and important for you to continue to improve, because this is where you strengthen your brand, your product, and this is an opportunity for you to save money and to see some of the things that you overlooked. I've worked in a project where we looked at the process, we evaluated the process, and when we validated the process, we were able to, this was a gluten-free product, so we're able to reduce the number, the mixing, we're able to improve the process. And there was a process where the product was just sitting to be able to have the gluten form, but just because the product was, the equipment had been purchased, which was a faster, the RPMs were higher, we're able to remove that step. And that step saved us, because it was always like a 5-hour setting period, and just that was able to save us a ton of money, because that was a step that we didn't have to do anymore. So I like this step of the ETS method, because this is an opportunity for you to increase and improve your margins however way you can, and opportunities for you to swap ingredients that could help your product, and you could help your bottom line. So if you need help in any way, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. I'm always excited to hear some of the questions that you have, and can even present them here and talk about them. So keep doing what you do, and keep growing your brand, because at the end of the day, we want those healthy food products in the stores where us and the next generation can enjoy without any problems, and without us not enjoying. So that's why I'm here. That's why I'm pushing you, because I want you to take that product in the market. I want to be able to go to the stores and walk through the aisles and pick up your product, because somebody in somewhere else was working hard to be able to produce that product and get it to us. So keep doing what you do. Until next week, keep scaling your food business. If you're finding this podcast helpful, leave me a review. This is a way of me knowing how it's impacting you and impacting your business, because that's why I'm here. I'm cheering you on to do better, and having the mission of helping food founders to be able to get their products out in the market to help the upcoming generation. By you leaving us a review, we're going to get in front of more food founders like yourself. Until next week, keep scaling your food business.